It's just a delight and pleasure to be with all of you for this day and this afternoon. And it's clear that there's so many levels of focus that we need to get this work scaled, as Ralph said, and to get the seeds planted and sustained. And it's great to build on the conversation of, how we think about the work at the national level, where I'm getting a chance for the first time to be. But I think in our hearts and the conversation today, that it's pretty clear that where things happen and where we make things stick is at that very local level and at the neighborhood level, and where we have relationships where we can really see the impact. And going back to that idea of stories, when I was sitting in the audience today, I was thinking about in my own childhood, what was my first sort of memory or experience where I began to think and learn about that harmony that needs to happen between the earth and I was a young child. And so I want to tell you that story because I think how we think about it at that most intimate level is sometimes what we hold on to and what motivates us to act. So my family is Indian, and even though I grew up in the States, we went to India often as children because that's where our family lived. And so I was remembering that I had an older relative who wanted to show me this great invention he had been making. And I was a little kid and I was excited, like, what was this invention that he had? And we went out into the yard and he showed me how he was using the sun to cook rice. And I thought, that's such a great idea. Now, what are all the things I'm learning as a little kid? And and then he showed me, and I'm realizing as I was sitting here, they must have been early solar panels. Because he said, and you know what? You can do other things with the sun. You can heat your house. And here I was, a little kid in the relationship, intergenerational conversation, cross countries, and this sort of intimacy of this moment, and it stuck. And I didn't even know I was learning about science and all of these other things. And so I think we have a moment now to really dig into that local action. And we have wonderful people up here today to help us situate that conversation. And I'm eager to chat with you all about that work you're doing. Let's start with you, Jammie. The National League of Cities is doing some really exciting work through the Cities for Early Childhood Success Equity Starts Early Initiative. And I'm just curious if you could share with us what you're doing through this initiative. That you have intersections that are very intentional to connect environmental challenges and really think about maternal and child health. We've heard about that on a couple of the panels today. And now you're building partnerships to make that action local. Tell us what inspired this initiative, who's participating, and what are you focusing on?
Awesome. Thank you, Swati. Just excited to be here, and this is such an important conversation. So the Equity Starts Early Initiative, because it's such a long name. So this is a part of our prenatal to 3 work. For several years, we've been funded by the Pritzker Children's Initiative to really hone in on those earliest years of development. All too often, when people hear early childhood, the automatic response is to think pre-K and school age. And so much happens in the earliest years of life that we miss the mark on. So I think that's a huge part of what inspired this. It's the urgency of now. Like, we cannot wait to take action and do more around this work. So this is a movement building strategy. This is our latest iteration. So we're looking at this as a movement building strategy to bring awareness to the issue and drive action around the implications of climate change on maternal and child health and well-being. This work is not new to the National League of Cities. I have colleagues in our Center for Municipal Practices who's been supporting city leaders on their resilience and sustainability plans to consider climate, even within the Institute for Youth Education and Families, looking at the connections to nature and children. How do we have more of that exposure, and how do we have that equitably? However, they are siloed conversations, and they are also excluding promising populations, as we keep talking about framing, but I think about promising populations of pregnant women, infants, and toddlers. They are not a part of that conversation at all. And we are excluding a critical period of development because we know that's never going to be repeated again in life. And how do we not take advantage of that opportunity? So what we've done in doing that, it's kind of a multi-layered strategy. We started internally. So how do we bring this siloed work together? So a lot of the things that you'll hear me talk about that we ask cities to do, I have to work and do that within my organization. And sometimes it's unfortunate, but that's the reality of what it is. So how do we take a step back and bring these partners to the table? Those who are leading the sustainability work and the connecting children to nature work, I've invited them to the early childhood table. And it makes me think of, I just came from a kindergarten readiness convening in Milwaukee. And I have a love-hate with kindergarten readiness because I don't feel like children have to get ready for kindergarten. Kindergarten should get ready for children. And I feel like this is the space we're in. Thank you. I feel like this is the space we're in with this climate work, is that the early childhood field is ready. So how do we get everyone else ready to be a part of this and really take action? So we deemed them 1 NLC roundtables because my goal is that no matter what your program focus is, you are going to elevate young children and families in that and see those connections. We also are getting more granular to really look about, Diana spoke about bright spots and what we're seeing in cities. So you have to be able to have that capacity to go deeper with them. So we launched a community of practice with 5 cities. We have Tacoma, Washington, Flint, Michigan. So I was really excited to hear about the work that's taking place there. Cleveland, Ohio, Charleston, South Carolina, and Newark, New Jersey. So we wanted to be strategic and go across NLCs. We have 4 regions that we divide our membership up into. So wanted to have a diverse set of cities from different regions, but really an opportunity to bring those cities together. And it's the early childhood municipal leaders who are doing this work. I'm going to reiterate the story of having someone at the federal level. It's so important to have that at the local level, and it does not happen a lot. There are not a lot of cities who have these people in place. So this early childhood work lives within the health department, within the resilience office, within neighborhood and community development. So these are the people who are leading this work, but how do we get the work that they're leading and have them bring the climate and the sustainability people to the table? And so how do we have peer learning opportunities and provide expertise to them as well as they do their work and offer up tangible solutions in real time? Really quickly. And then we also, we're looking at leveraging the position that we have at NLC and having that national platform and being able to leverage that and pull partners together. So we have been we're in the process of convening a series of national partner learning labs because there's so many people looking at what's going to happen in this work, and this work is place-based. It cannot be done without cities. You have to have them in this conversation, and they have to be accountable because we all have a role to play in it. So I'm really excited as we kick off those conversations to stop having separate ones, but bring everyone together to the table so we can look at how we could better do this work collectively.
Thank you so much, Jammie. That's a great example of attending to what both Mario and Diana were concerned about as you think about building those cross-cutting connections between the national, federal, and local. And it feels like that convening power is helping bring some of that capacity. Over to you, Kristin. I would love to take us to the city of Boston and to think and learn with you about the work you're doing to leverage the mayor's office to really look at that intersection of both the Boston Green New Deal, which we want to hear more about, and early childhood work. And as I understand, your learnings have taken you to London as well. So we'd love to hear about all of this.
I have. Well, first of all, thank you for having me. And it's so nice to see all of my Boston colleagues here in this room. We don't see each other upstate, but we run into each other in New York City. So I'm going to hopefully do us right and proud in my responses. The first thing I think is important to understand, and when we were talking earlier about everyone needing an early childhood office, my office is new. We've been in existence for just over a year. So one of the first things that Mayor Wu did was establish an Office of Early Childhood. I started on April 4th, so you can figure out the math and understand how long we've been around. And there are 3 of us. We're a mighty team. And we are charged with helping the mayor deliver on making Boston the friendliest city for families. And so that's paired with her goal for Boston being green and growing. So not only being the best place to raise a family, but also being a growing city that is growing in a way that is climate friendly. And so when I think about our work, I think about it in a couple different ways, right? So the first way is that she invested almost $18 million of ARPA funding in us and said, go save childcare. We're like, great. So we're doing that over here. Anybody wants to talk about that? I'm happy to have that conversation offline. And then the second is, how do we really think about meeting families and working with families so that we're not just attending to the basics, but how are we actually thinking about making Boston a place where people want to live and stay and see it as a friendly place to be raising your children. I know all of you think of Boston in that way. You think about us as a friendly, welcoming place that you want to raise your children in, right? That's what comes to mind first. And how do we do that in a way that actually aligns with the policy goals that she's set around climate, around green infrastructure, and all those other pieces. And so what we did first was actually meet with families. And so, Ron gave us some folks from the Basics crowd who work in parent leadership, and Renee Boynton-Jarrett, who I saw earlier, we got some family members from her, from Vital Village, and really talked about with them, what are the things that the city is not doing now that you want to see us deliver on? And we sort of felt like they would say things like, good education and housing. And they said, actually, what we want from you is things that give our children an opportunity to explore their own purpose and to find their own meaning and to meet deeply together in community. None of those things are surprising, but we had to make sure that those things aligned with what my mayor wants in terms of being green and growing and family friendly. And so what we've done in Boston is we've actually launched Boston's commitment to young children, which is framed in a way, and I hope Nat is going to tell us we did this right, but is framed in a way that families told us they wanted it to be, which is, we're going to teach every kid by the time they're in 3rd grade how to swim, how to ride a bike. They're going to have an opportunity to explore a sport. They're going to become part of a green and growing generation. So they're going to get out and get dirty and learn to plant. And then the last thing they're going to do is have an opportunity to explore the arts. 3 of those things are aligned with our climate agenda, and we did not mention the word climate, right? If every kid knows how to ride a bike and wants to use their bike to get places in the city of Boston, we're not going to have as many arguments in our city planning about bike lanes. If every kid knows how to swim, God forbid, if we have a flood, they can save themselves. But we talked about it in terms of being able to access the resources that are natural to our environment, being able to use our harbor, being able to sail, to kayak, whatever. And so that's sort of how we've been working with families and thinking about that intersection between our public spaces and the commitments we as a city are making to them, which brings us to London. So I had the opportunity to go with a team of folks to Urban 95 Academy in London, which is run by the London School of Economics and the Bernard von Leer Foundation. And for us, it was really critical because what we're thinking about is how you build a city that includes early childhood development principles. So how do you think about all of your places and spaces so that they're designed for someone who's 95 centimeters tall, which is the average height of a 3-year-old. And so that's one of the lenses that we're really trying to bring to our conversations around affordable housing. Do we have access to green space? Do we have access to a 15-minute city assets. So all of those things have become a part of the conversations we're having. Now, I am not a designer. I am an early childhood person. Maybe. I'm definitely an education policy person. And so, my role is always to say in those conversations, how are we thinking about families? How are we about making sure that they have access to all of the rich assets that we have in our city? So that's sort of how we've been trying to do our work, but we have been doing it in silos. And so this conversation has been really interesting to me when we think about more of the intersection between climate and early childhood. And so my colleague, who's a senior advisor on all things Green New Deal, is here. And so we're sort of thinking about what can we do when we go home, having listened to today's conversation.
One of the things I really hear from both of you, which is I think the beauty of working at the local level, is you don't hear lots of different agencies, lots of different funding streams. What I hear you saying is what's the experience of a community and really centering a quality of life. And that is an integrated vision. So that's really helpful. That's obviously not very easy to do. And so, Jammie, I want to come back to you and describe for us a little more sort of at these tables that you're convening, what it really means for communities doing this work, and sort of what are your aha moments and what are some of the challenges? Because we know this is tough work.
No, absolutely. And I think it's the ability to connect the dots for others. You have to be able to do that. And I think we just launched the community of practice in March. So we really just started with taking a step back, even cities that had worked with us previously, but let's really evaluate what's in place now. Because I think we all can agree the past 3 years, the world turned upside down, and what was relevant in 2019 may not be what's relevant now. So really looking at what's currently in place and what are some of those opportunities we can identify and kind of insert the work. What are those great points of entry across different city departments? Alignment is such a huge piece of this work that we're seeing, that you have to do that. It cannot keep being the responsibility of the early childhood person again, so I'll just continue to drive that. But it's also the merger of human and physical infrastructure. I heard infrastructure so much, and I was just crossing my fingers that someone would say human infrastructure investments, and how are we investing in people? And so that's where I think a lot of those who lead the early childhood work, that's what we're seeing. Because they are human focused, but a lot of what municipalities are responsible for, when we think about water supply, gas and electric supply, trash removal, all those things create a livable environment. And if it's not done right, it becomes an unhealthy environment for children and families. So how do you demonstrate those connections of what you said? You don't have to call out climate specifically. And I know it's hard from where we sit because we're a bipartisan organization. So I have to step over myself and put my personal views aside. And that's when you just have to really figure out what sword do you really want to die on in order to get your message across and with the work that you want to do. So I think some of the aha moments of what we're seeing in this, when we have conversations with the other departments, for instance, Charleston did a webinar with us, and we were so grateful. We had Harvard Center for Developing Child, Corey Zimmerman, join us to really drive the science part, but someone mentioned it earlier, the science is not landing with elected officials all the time. So how do you, and that's the benefit of us joining together to make the science tangible and bring it to life and be able to offer some concrete examples of what they can do to make these connections. So we do that work in partnership with the National Association of Counties, and I see my colleague Arabella here today, as well as the National Conference of State Legislators. So being able to elevate the importance of that intergovernmental partnership to drive this work, and how do you blend and braid your funding together to really make it work. So those are some of the aha moments, because the sustainability people at the county and both the city levels, well, we kind of don't focus on children, but then they start naming the things that they do. And then we're able to draw those lines and say, well, this impacts children. You're planting trees and you're making more green space, and that's improving air quality. So you have to make those, you almost have to backdoor it, which is unfortunate sometimes, but you have to do what you have to do to get the message across. So those are some of the aha, it's not an aha for me, but it's the aha of seeing them get it. And when it clicks, it's just like when a child is learning something, you're like, you got it. And so that's exciting, but a challenge, to be honest, and I don't know necessarily if I would call it a challenge, but more so of an opportunity, is how do we get these, it's the assumption that these things are implied in the work. And I feel like when it comes to young children and families, we have to be intentional. And so when we talk about equity, we have to be intentional about what we're talking about. You have to be intentional about who these services are for. You have to be intentional about who's going to benefit for them. So that's an opportunity more so than a challenge. But at the local level, a challenge is transition of leadership. And that's the importance of having this work embedded in government, that it's not just a mayoral priority, which is important, and that may kick it off, but how do we do that this work will sustain those leadership transitions and continue, because the needs of the community are still going to be the same no matter who's in leadership. And if you don't have an opportunity to finish it in a 4-year term or a 2-year term, how do we ensure that this work continues?
That look ahead, Jammie, is so important. And, as I think over to you, Kristin, you talked a bit about the seeds of planting this vision and your aspirations. As you look to the future, even though you're new in this role, what does it look like and what are some of those plans? Could you share those with us?
Sure. So I think part of it is an inside-outside strategy. So what are the internal places that we need to be focused? So the first is really thinking about working with our urban design and our streets folks. They are the ones that have the opportunity to create our landscape or to recreate our landscape in a way that's either pedestrian and family friendly or isn't. And so how do we actually engage with them and think about that as one of the potential opportunities for us to be really bringing in early childhood development, bringing in families. So that's sort of one area that we've been thinking about. And those folks are people who stay. Those are not people who go away when an administration changes. They are the people who are like continuing to do your streets for the next 20 years. The other one that we've been thinking about is making sure that we're focusing on family-friendly outdoor space. So how are we bringing climate resilience principles to redoing outdoor spaces? So we've been thinking about that as potentially an area where we could be doing some piloting. Again, that's making lasting change in the environment that's going to outlast our administration. And also, how are we thinking about activating those spaces with programming, which is sort of more short term, but I think once a community has an activated community space, they tend to continue to demand it once it's become popular. And we're really working with community to identify what those places and spaces look like. And then there's two other things that I think, as I've been listening to today, I'm like, I should go read that infrastructure bill. But one of them is how we bring some of the retrofitting for climate to our childcare spaces. Probably not new builds, but in a city like Boston, a lot of childcare happens in basements and the air quality is terrible. So how do we think about using and accessing some of those infrastructure dollars to think about retrofits that get at decarbonization, anti-petroleum, but are also really about better air quality and better spaces for young people to be in? So we're thinking about that one. And then the last thing we're thinking about is really building on the rich asset of the early childhood field in terms of our parent partners. Like, we have parent partners in all of our neighborhoods. How are we thinking about them as advocates for the kinds of work that we want to do? And how do we actually work with them to identify the work that we're going to do together? And what does that look like? Those are things that I think we were thinking about coming into today, that now we have some better thoughts about what direction we might go in just from having listened to the conversation.
Thank you. Really appreciate it. I want to turn over in this direction and invite Joan into this conversation. And I think as I look around at familiar faces, we would probably all quickly agree that you, more than anyone else in this room, are uniquely suited to bring this conversation together, the different pieces that we've been talking about today. And you've written so frequently about how we do so and the resilience of early childhood and the role it plays in building stronger and healthier families and communities, and how this work needs to be cross-sector to create the kind of neighborhoods where we know our children can thrive. And I'm I'm sure we're all curious to hear what you think about as you think about the action at the local level, which you've always been very strongly passionate about. And I mean, it's an opportunity to hear from you about what communities should be thinking about.
Mic all day. Well, thank you so much. First of all, I want to start. I feel so humbled because there's so many people in this room that have been thinking about this for way longer. I know that is the Children's Environmental Health Network here. I know they were on their way. They've been working on this for 30 years and on the intersection of this. So this is a conversation that's been going on for a long time. But I want to start my remarks by acknowledging Swati and Mario, because I know how hard those jobs are. And I want you all to join me in thanking them for taking the time to be here with us. I know it's stressful, but it does pay off in the end. You just have to be, persevere. And Jammie, you took your leadership moment and you're flying with it. And we really recognize that she is the definer of the solution. Call the meeting. Bring the early childhood people together with the sustainability people and have a conversation. It's not that complicated. So you really are taking the lead on this, and we're all following, and we're grateful. And Kristin, I must say that you probably know, we didn't get a chance to talk, but I started my career in Boston, in the Alston-Brighton Head Start. And what I remembered about that this morning when I knew I was going to see you was the number of children who had asthma. This is 1972, they had asthma. And it was strange to me that so many children, and then I thought, well, it's cold here. Maybe it's just because people get more colds. But on reflecting back, early childhood programs could be epidemiologists because they see things before other people see them. And so I started my life that way, and my life in the field, and I'm proud of that moment. But one of my more recent journeys in the field was with the Bernard Van Leer Foundation when they started Urban 95. So I just loved hearing that came all the way home. So one of the graduate students at Georgetown was doing a workshop on environmental issues and children, and I went to hear it. And she started it by going around the room and asking everybody what was their first memory of their own interaction with the environment. And I thought that was such an important thing because we have to go all the way back to how were we connected or not connected to our own environments. And you did that, Swati. So, well, I mean, I can't remember anything except for I climbed a lot of trees and got in trouble all the time for climbing trees because young girls were not supposed to climb trees, but whatever. So, just reflecting on what we heard today, throughout the day, I must say, Dana, my telomeres are gone from this day and from my own age. So bear with me. I turned to my dearest friend, Nat, and said, well, help me out here, Nat. He hadn't even had lunch yet. Like, how do you wrap this up? And, he said in his wisdom, because Phil, my colleague from Stanford, has, and I were talking, and we were saying, think of all the terms you heard today. Like, how do you put these pictures together? And Nat said, he gave me kind of one of the answers, and to kind of relax, because this is just the beginning of a conversation, and we've got a lot to work through yet. And then Laura used the analogy, she talked about her marriage. And in some ways, this is like a marriage, right? And so at the wedding, you meet people, but you don't really know them. You don't really know how to talk about their issues. And so that's where we are. We're just at the intersection of issues that families have dealt with for decades. And we heard that so clearly. And we know that in the unfortunate historic racism that the country's experienced. But I think that we've begun the conversation, and what makes it so difficult is the intersectoral nature of the conversation, not just across our sectors, but it's intergovernmental, it's intergenerational. But I do think some frames are emerging that young children are vulnerable and they're valuable. And that, this is not from me, this is from the Asia Pacific Regional Early Childhood Network. They said it. They said they're vulnerable and they're valuable. That's simple. We can go with that. They said, you know, I've said hope, I've said urgency and hope. We can go with that, same kind of terms. There's protective factors and there's risk factors. And we are worried about all the different elements of nurturing care that are threatened by this issue. And we're also hopeful that if we provide good health and early learning, will make a difference. So, you know, we have frames, but it's been difficult to simplify them. I was impressed, Kristin, with your turn to parents. And I think we need to hear more of that. I thought the parent advocacy discussion this morning was really terrific. In our own work, we've been doing this rapid study for 3 years now of young children, parents of young children, and we recently did a series of questions on environmental issues. More than 50% of the parents said they'd had experienced an extreme climate event, not just a climate event, an extreme climate event. More than 70% of the parents said they were worried about their children. And so we should remember that, and we have a lot more work to do on that to find out what they need us to do and how we should talk about it. But I think we have to turn to parents. I think what is hardest for me about this conversation is that this is not about tomorrow's children. This is about the children, particularly in the global South, that are dying because of climate change and dying because of things that we need to stand up and talk about. And that is carbon emissions, and that are things that are affecting the rest of the world today. The other day there was a short article that said 400 people in the DRC had died from floods. And I kept thinking 400, I bet 200 of them were children, at least. And I bet that was climate related. The article didn't say that, but you know, you could just tell. So look, I think we got a lot of solutions. I'm excited about the solutions. I'm particularly excited that CGI has brought everybody together to start the conversation, to have the wedding. Okay, it's just the wedding. We've got to meet again at the anniversary. But we have to also let people in wherever they want to come in. Like I had someone said to me, don't give me this nature education, that's not going to be the answer. It was like, well, yes, it is. If that's where people can start, if we can take away the plastic playgrounds, I'd be really happy. If we could get those early childhood programs out of the basement, if we can green the Head Start buses, if we can encourage Head Start parents to have green jobs and not be working in the basement, I'd be happy. So I think we have to start where people are. I do think we have to teach policy. I've read the Infrastructure Reduction Act. I've been at the federal level 3 times, 3 different administrations. it's really hard to follow this. So we have to teach people how to advocate around environmental issues. The EPA and HHS have the same regional offices. Like, do they know each other? How are they talking? Are they starting there? And then I think finally I'll end with two things. One, I think we have to join the rest of the world in their conversations about this. There's a few people here that live with me in the global early childhood community, have had these conversations for several years already. Things are emerging in WHO, in UNESCO, in UNICEF, which we'll hear later about their climate risk index and so many things that they're doing. One of my greatest moments of the day was when Laura Shifter, who does education solutions, met Sarah Beardsmore, who does global partnership for education issues globally, and they're talking about the same thing. And that they meet now and talk about how we can solve this partially through education, and what are the bright spots, not just in Baltimore, but in Bangladesh. That gives me hope. I'll end with Gary Nell inspired me, so I'm going to be inspired. There's a book called Girls Who Green the World. Girls Who Green the World. 34 rebel women out to save the planet by Diana Kapp. And of course, Dr. Mona is in the book. But she's dedicated the book to her children because she said in the dedication, there is no planet B. There is no planet B. So let's remember that. Let's be unapologetic about talking about environmental issues and be proud that early childhood is part of the solution. Thanks.
Thank you, Joan, for that incredible vision, call to action, and to Jammie and Kristin for your vision, passion, and courage to dig in and clearly commit to doing that work day to day with parents and doing it locally where that's where we're going to see real results on the ground. The good news for everyone is we have a break now, and I'm told that there are delightful treats at the back room to accompany your break, so please enjoy.
Really quickly, Swati, before we go, I would be remiss, and I don't want to miss this opportunity to say this, because as we think about these different tables coming together, I don't want us to lose sight of who owns the table, and that's the families, and I love that you are centering families in your work, and I just didn't want to miss this opportunity to say that, because we always ask yourself who's missing, who's benefited, and who's burdened, and who's not at this table that should be there. So I just didn't want to not say that.
I'm really glad you brought it to the table. Thank you. Thanks so much, Jammie.